These are the stories of 10 of the greatest paintings in the world. I'm Andrew Marr. Art, not politics, is the great passion of my life. For me, it gets to the heart of what it is to be human. In galleries across the globe, there are great paintings, works made with almost supernatural skill, fierce passion, and extraordinary brain power. Now I want to tell stories behind some of the most iconic images in history, pictures like Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Van Gogh's Sunflowers, and Turner's Fighting Temeraire, paintings that represent the pinnacle of what people can do with paint and bristles.
His watercolours described as miraculous. People can't believe the effects that he manages to achieve.
It was like you could touch these people. It was like the portrait could speak to you.
Behind every picture, there is a story. I'm going to peel back the layers to find out more about the lives of their creators and the worlds they came from.
There was something about this middle-class Florentine housewife that intrigued him.
Why are these the paintings we all know and love? How were they created? And what makes them the greatest paintings in the world? I'm in London's National Gallery, just after the doors have closed for the evening, which is lucky for me, because if they were open, I could not be standing here, because of the 5 million people who come through these rooms every year. So many are attracted to just one image, like bears to honey or bees to nectar. What is the image, you ask yourself? But already you know the answer. This is The Sunflowers by Vincent van Gogh, the patron saint of loneliness. It's a deceptively simple image, just 15 sunflowers in a modest pot. And yet, this picture is a phenomenon. It quite literally dazzles anyone who comes into its orbit. This is one of the brightest pictures you will ever see. You walk into this room, which is full of fantastic paintings by very famous painters, and this punches you hard in the eye, so hard you can almost fall over. But here is the paradox. Behind the brightness, it is also a surprisingly dark picture. For an artist who produced almost 2,000 drawings and paintings, it's often said that this picture is the one that Van Gogh was most proud of. It's a deeply personal painting that captures a definitive moment in his life. Van Gogh did not paint this to hang in the National Gallery or any other gallery, frankly. He painted it for a much more personal and intimate reason. He painted it to hang in the bedroom of a friend for whose company he was desperate and who he had invited down to his house to stay. It was, if you like, a kind of lure. And although it may appear to be a joyous picture, the story behind it is, frankly, harrowing. It's a story which begins with the artist as a boy, in a life tarnished by tragedy right from the start. A year to the day before Van Gogh was born in 1853, his parents had another son who died a few hours after birth, also called Vincent.
From an early age, he was quite intense. In the churchyard outside the room where he was born and where he first grew up, there was a tombstone with his own name and date of birth 1 year earlier, so it must have affected him.
Brought up in Brabant, southern Holland, Van Gogh was the eldest of 6, but he was also always a loner.
Van Gogh, I think, was a really interesting, extraordinary, possibly quite frustrating young man. He was baffling. And he was somebody who would become instantly enamoured of something and possibly just as quickly give it up again.
He was a missionary.
A bookshop assistant.
He was a preacher.
He wanted to be a priest at one point.
His family actually offered to pay for him to go to theological college. He's like, oh, I don't want to do that anymore.
An apprentice art dealer.
Some say he was a baker.
He's also a bookseller.
This is my favourite, an unpaid assistant prep school master in Ramsgate. His family showed signs of absolute desperation in trying to think of what Vincent could do.
But there was one member of his family who saw talent in Van Gogh from the start. His younger brother and closest friend, Theo.
Theo suggested to him, why don't you try your hand at being an artist? Because, you know, you're quite good.
He never had any formal art training. He taught himself, and he enjoyed it.
It was a career he was able to pursue only because Theo, by then an art dealer in Paris, offered to support him.
Van Gogh's relationship with his brother is complicated, like all his relationships, but nevertheless it's the most enduring relationship. Theo is his anchor, and without Theo's support, financial, moral, emotional, Van Gogh may never have developed as an artist.
His early paintings are a world away from the sunflowers. He painted what he saw around him, miners and struggling peasants, the subject of an ambitious early work which is almost a caricature of the Dutch tradition of peasant portraits, the potato eaters.
It's a work which is about a peasant family gathered around this rather meagre meal, and it's a symphony of browns and beiges, no bright colour at all.
It also shows his identifying with the people who he's painting. It seems to contain anguish within it. You see these people who are pinched by poverty. There's really not enough to eat, and Van Gogh gets this across in his work in a quite extraordinarily empathetic way.
He painted the peasants with haggard features and desperate expressions. He was quietly pleased with the finished canvas. Perhaps this would be the piece to launch him as an artist. But it didn't sell. Not only was it bleak, his critics complained, but the figures were badly realized. It was at this point that Van Gogh made a crucial decision. He would leave the Low Countries. He decided to go to France, or rather, to its beating cultural heart, Paris. Good call. Paris would help him unlock a new creative style, a fresh vision. What Vincent would find in Paris would change his entire approach to painting. Vincent van Gogh's Sunflowers is one of the most famous paintings in the world. Created in 1888, it still dazzles us more than 130 years later. This is such a familiar image, it's quite hard to remember just how strange and radical this painting is. First thing to say, every painter is told you need lots of contrasts of colour, different colours rubbing up against each other. And what has Van Gogh done? It's basically all yellow. Primrose yellow, orangey yellow, a kind of creamy yellow, a greeny yellow. Yellow, 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 and yellow. He has more or less used up all his yellow on this one image. The reasoning behind this reckless use of colour originated in the next chapter of Van Gogh's life. Paris.
If you were interested in painting, that was the place you had to go. There was an awful lot of exciting avant-garde ferment and controversial cutting-edge stuff being done in Paris.
Paris at the time was so different to what he was used to. There was colour, there were bars, there were brothels. He fell in love with the museums, with the art, with the fact that all the artists were there as one big family, and he wanted to be part of that family.
He soon became friends with radical artists like Toulouse-Lautrec. They were as inspired as he was by the Impressionists.
The great revelation of Paris for Van Gogh was colour.
When he saw the Impressionists, he was so flabbergasted by the colours they were using and their small, light brush marks.
Impressionism and its fizz of colour was so exciting to him.
The Impressionist techniques changed everything. This was how Van Gogh was meant to paint. All he needed now was a subject that spoke to and of him. Common, prickly, standing alone. And it was when he stumbled on an allotment during one of his frequent walks that he finally found it, the image that would come to define him. Here, Van Gogh made a painting of one lonely sunflower. Now, nothing against sunflowers, but they're not exactly the most sophisticated, beautiful, interesting flowers. They're not beautiful roses. They're not like those gorgeous, multicoloured tulips the Dutch enjoyed painting so much. They're not even hollyhocks. They are fairly basic flowers. They're tough, but really quite earthy blooms, and something about their character clearly spoke to Van Gogh.
He is, in a sense, an outsider in the art world. He's a maverick. He doesn't fit in well. And the sunflower has that kind of rebellious quality that I think he identifies with.
For whatever reason, his paintings were transformed. The dark, dull tones of his first canvases disappeared for good. Instead, he embraced his palette, reaching for brighter shades, adding emphatic dashes of yellow. He worked more urgently, using stronger, swifter strokes. Even the dying two-cut sunflowers feel full of vigour. Eventually, they caught the eye of a man who was to play a huge role in his life from this moment on, the one who would inspire his most famous work. His name was Paul Gauguin, an older and more established artist who'd seen some of Van Gogh's work hanging on a local cafe wall. He asked for two of the sunflower paintings.
And in return, Paul Gauguin gave Vincent one of his paintings. So there's an early kind of mark of friendship in this exchange of paintings.
His friends may have admired his work, but Van Gogh was struggling to find a wider audience. His paintings just weren't selling.
You know, he's living a very precarious life. It's very isolated. He has no real profile in the art world of Paris.
Worse still, he wasn't getting on with his brother Theo.
From the evidence we have, it seems that virtually nobody could stand living with Vincent van Gogh or indeed spending extended periods in his company. You just couldn't stop him talking.
He was incredibly intense. They were living in a very small flat, which was quite claustrophobic for the two of them. Theo was going to his job every day and Vincent was staying at home painting, making an awful lot of mess.
Theo reports that after a hard day at work as an art dealer, he'd come home, have supper, Vincent would start talking to him. Theo would say he was tired and thought he'd go to bed. Would go to bed and Vincent would follow him into the bedroom, pull up a chair and carry on talking to him. He was very difficult company.
Just 2 years after he'd arrived in Paris, Van Gogh was now desperate to leave.
He was suffering, as he often did, from depression, low spirits, heavy drinking. He didn't like the cold and dark of the Parisian winter. He wanted to experience the bright light and colour of the South. And all these motivations prompted him, possibly quite on the spur of the moment, to climb on the express train to Provence.
Vincent van Gogh arrived in Arles, in the southeast of France, towards the end of February 1888. For local expert Philippe Gonninet, there was an immediate connection between the artist and this quiet, ancient town.
Van Gogh came to the south of France, looking for the color, for the light. Actually, he took the train to Marseille and just stopped in Arles for a short period of time, really fell in love with the city, hence the reason why he stayed.
He suddenly felt this desire to paint, and not just one or two pictures, but to keep painting. He wanted to paint the sunshine.
The next 15 months were astonishingly productive. Van Gogh's style began to transform once again, developing the bold expressiveness that would play such an important part in the Sunflowers. He filled his canvases with blossoming trees and local workers, fishing boats he saw on a day trip to the coast. Many of the scenes he painted look just the same today.
So I'm now standing in front of Terrasse de Café la Nuit, one of the central bars in Arles that was painted by Van Gogh. And he would love to come in the evening. He had his wooden hat with little candles stuck on it in order to have a little light in order to do the painting and see the painting he was doing. He's one of the first painters to paint outside in the evening.
But this wasn't the only reason he stood out in Arles.
The local used to call him le fou roux, the mad ginger guy. And they didn't really like him because A, he was an artist, B, he was drinking a lot of absinthe at the time. He was sleeping with prostitutes. Plus people that had seen him painting were a bit worried about him because he was painting like frantic, manic, and very, very quick and talking to himself.
People found him strange, and a lot of Van Gogh's life was spent being incredibly lonely. He was a person that people didn't really understand. If they did understand him, they often didn't like him or were scared of him. And this led to a great feeling of isolation.
So now I'm taking you to the Rue du Bout du Monde, the end of the world street. That was the former name where the brothel Van Gogh used to go is located. One of those tiny houses where we'd be coming to look for comfort and someone to talk to.
Just 3 months after he arrived in Arles, Van Gogh confessed to Theo in a letter, "You know, I've always thought it ridiculous for painters to live alone. You always lose when you're isolated." And he knew he had to do something to make his life happier.
He conceived the idea that it would be very good to get other friends and associates from Paris to come and settle there, to set up an artist's colony.
It would be a wonderful community of artists where they'd all live happily and they'd sell their work together. Be a collective.
Van Gogh looked around for a suitable location, and in the scruffier part of town between the railway station and the brothels, he found it, the Yellow House.
He was really happy and wrote very enthusiastically to two of his sisters and his brother about how he was going to start this arts community. And he was looking forward to the future.
The first person he invited was Paul Gauguin, the artist he'd met in Paris, to whom he'd given his 2 early sunflower paintings.
Gauguin didn't want to go. Gauguin came from a very different background. Before he was a painter, he was a stockbroker. He was used to living a very different type of life. But what encouraged him was Van Gogh's brother, Theo, who at the time sold Gauguin's paintings. And he said to Gauguin, "I will pay you to go and stay with my brother."
So that July, Gauguin finally agreed to come to Arles. Full of anticipation, Van Gogh wanted to make a dramatic gesture. He decided to decorate Gauguin's bedroom, and he turned to the one subject that had brought them together in the first place: sunflowers. Van Gogh had dreamed of a set of 12 sunflower pictures. This is one of 4 that he made in an extraordinary, intense burst of energy over just a few days. Each canvas is slightly different. The first is a simple composition. 3 huge blooms pop against a bright, bold background. Then he experiments with much more vivid shades. The sunflowers are rougher and more abstract, his loose strokes accentuating their spiky petals. By the third painting, the composition had a calmer confidence. 14 sunflowers in every stage of life, complemented by gentler, more even tones. He thought it would be his best, until he started on the 4th.
He's depicting 15 sunflowers, with a very radical yellow on yellow colour scheme that he describes as light on light.
Nobody had ever done anything quite that wild. Essentially, all yellow, yellow on yellow, different kinds of yellow. A monochrome picture.
Some of them just have the spikes left, so they're sort of at the end of their day, passing away.
There's not this kind of dishonesty of showing flowers in a sort of permanent state of bloom and of youthfulness. And that, again, is very characteristic of Van Gogh. He's looking at the natural world with this very kind of receptive eye. He's looking at all the detail, but also this kind of passage of time.
When Van Gogh was painting sunflowers, he was at his happiest. And he was happy because he thought his life was going to change now. Gauguin was coming. All his past demons would disappear through Gauguin. They would paint together, they would live together. This was Van Gogh, who was used to solitude. He thought it was going to be a whole new beginning for him. And of course, it wasn't to be.
Van Gogh poured all of himself into these paintings. Like all his great paintings, I believe that these are fundamentally lively, passionate, colourful pictures about human loneliness. In the midst of movement and colour and life and beauty, we are, in the end, by ourselves. These are the final testament of a lonely man, which is perhaps why we respond to them so strongly. Only 4 months after he finished them, he had a full mental breakdown, and 2 years later, he was dead. In the summer of 1888, Van Gogh painted a series of sunflowers, culminating in these 15 magnificent blooms. Even now, more than 100 years on, his flowers seem as vivid as the day he painted them. So what techniques did Van Gogh use on his canvas to capture the spirit of the subject he loved so much? Classically in painting, you're taught to make the brushwork vanish. You can't see it. It's so smooth that you have the illusion that you're looking at a real flower or a real pot or whatever it might be. Here, Van Gogh has done exactly the opposite. You can see every single flicker and mark that his thumb and forefinger and the brush have made. He uses impasto, great big gobs of paint slammed onto the canvas. You can see he's taken a brush and filled it up with really thick paint and then kind of stabbed it into the canvas and then he's pulled the brush straight out again. So it's almost three-dimensional. The strokes of the petals and the leaves are again great wadges of paint. It's not a picture of a dead sunflower. It's pretty close to being the thing itself. And the sunflowers aren't the only place where you can see Van Gogh's ingenuity on this canvas. If you look at the back of the painting, the wall, it's a kind of buttery slab of paint. You can actually see not just the thickness of the brushes he was using, you can actually see the individual bristles of the brush still captured in reverse on the oil paint. He's saying, remember that I, Van Gogh, made this with my hands. Think about my thick fingers, think about my brushes, think about the oil and the goo and the slap and the sweat that went into this. All of that is still bleeding and dripping off the canvas all these years afterwards. For the very first time as he painted his sunflowers, Van Gogh was full of hope for his community at the Yellow House, for his friendship with Paul Gauguin, and for his own future as an artist. All of this he funneled directly into the radiant blooms. It took Van Gogh just a week to complete the 4 sunflower paintings, and when he had, he put the last 2, the 2 that he liked best, onto the walls of Gauguin's bedroom. And they must have blazed from the walls of the bedroom of this tiny French townhouse. A shout, a scream almost, for companionship.
The effect of Gauguin's bedroom must have been quite extraordinarily overwhelming. He must have got quite a shock when he arrived.
He was bowled over. He loved them. Of all the things that Van Gogh did, Gauguin loved the sunflowers the most.
Quickly, the two men settled into an intense partnership.
To start off with, they set out working together, and it actually goes surprisingly well. Van Gogh settles down. They start producing quite a lot of good work.
Van Gogh was very quick, very immediate, painting a picture a day, attacking the canvas almost as if he's dancing with it. Gauguin, on the other hand, was much more methodical, much slower, much more considered. Van Gogh liked to paint from life. Gauguin liked to paint from his imagination and from his memory.
In November 1888, Van Gogh painted portraits of the two men's chairs, wittily capturing their different natures.
The two chairs are a symbol of his and Gauguin's friendship, and they seem, just through these simple chairs, to encapsulate the two very different personalities of the artist.
Vincent's chair shows his simplicity. He didn't need much to be happy in life, whereas Gauguin was a bit more worldly. Gauguin would be reading modern novels and keeping up to date with what was fashionable.
When you look at them, you feel as if they've perhaps only just been vacated. They're a wonderful symbol of this community that Van Gogh had so wanted to build.
But as days turned to weeks, this dream became less and less a reality, and with only each other for company, the two men's differences became more and more pronounced.
Gauguin found living with Van Gogh very, very difficult. The two artists were very, very different people.
Gauguin hated living in Arles. He said it was the filthiest hole in the south. He really disliked it. And they were beginning to get on each other's nerves.
Then the weather deteriorates. Wind starts blowing, it starts getting cold and rainy. They have to work indoors, which means they're working in one small room. Van Gogh is probably talking quite a lot of the time, and pacing up and down was another of his habits when working. Gauguin is trying to concentrate, and after a while, things get more and more tense.
They would argue about art. They would argue about cooking, the best way to cook tomatoes, even. They argued about everything. Van Gogh scared Gauguin. It's been said that Gauguin recalled how he would be asleep in his bed and he'd wake up and Van Gogh would be standing over him, staring at him while he was in bed asleep.
It didn't take long for everything to come to a head.
Something on December the 23rd pushed him over the edge. What Gauguin said afterwards is he was just so bizarre I couldn't stand it anymore.
Gauguin said, that's it, I've had enough, I'm leaving, I'm going back to Paris and I'm going, I won't be coming back.
Van Gogh has such a volatile temper. It just escalated, it went crazy. Gauguin ran out into the street and Van Gogh followed him with his razor.
The two men continued to scream at each other until Gauguin took refuge in a hotel. Van Gogh stormed back to the Yellow House and, still holding his razor, sliced off a chunk of an ear.
He wrapped up his ear in newspaper, put a beret on to disguise his wound, and took it off to the brothel, where he left it at the door for a certain employee who went under the name of Rachel, went back to his house, got into bed and passed out.
Really, it was self-harm. He was desperate. All his hopes and his dreams and his future with Gauguin had disappeared. They'd evaporated over this row, and he felt as though he had no future.
By the time the police arrived the next morning, it said the walls of the Yellow House were stained with blood. Van Gogh was rushed to hospital, the doctors questioning if he would survive.
And it was really then that his family, I think, started to realise that he genuinely was, as his brother put it, mad.
He was on obviously getting hallucinations. He was behaving very strangely. There were complaints from the neighbours about odd behaviour. From that point on, he actually seems to have lost confidence himself. And finally, he tells his brother that he doesn't think at this stage he's really up to living on his own.
5 months after he severed his ear, Van Gogh was committed to this asylum in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. It's an old monastery which still serves as a psychiatric hospital today.
Van Gogh came by himself and signed the registry by himself, asking him to be at the hospital, looking for a refuge, really. He knew he needed some help and he needed some peace for a while.
Nowadays, he would be classed as being bipolar, but then they would lock you up. He'd be surrounded by people in straitjackets, people wailing, people crying. It was very traumatic. Behind locked doors, bars in front of windows, cold rooms. It was a very difficult time for him.
In his letters, he wrote of being kept awake by terrible howls, as of animals in a menagerie, and he described the other men as my companions in misfortune.
The main treatment was cold baths. For Van Gogh, I think it was twice a week, a 2-hour bath. The treatment were basically useless. Proof is that most of the patients that were staying while Van Gogh was here spent all their life and died at the hospital.
But for Van Gogh, there was only one therapy that was ever really going to help.
He painted a lot. He did 150 paintings that are known of. The landscapes, the color, the sky was something that would give him peace every day.
Interestingly and very sadly, some of his best work was done when he checked himself into the asylum. And perhaps that's because he was surrounded by people all the time and people were caring for him.
And it was while he was here in the asylum that Van Gogh faced his biggest public test as an artist. In January 1890, he was invited to show his work at an exhibition in Brussels, alongside old friends like Toulouse-Lautrec. Still too ill to attend himself, the painting he chose to send was The Sunflowers.
Vincent was so proud that he'd been selected out of 20 foreign artists to be exhibited in this exhibition.
Not all the artists liked his work. They just didn't respect them.
There was one artist called Henri de Gros, and he said, "I will not be put by that abominable pot of sunflowers by Vincent." And it caused a fight. Toulouse-Lautrec stood up in honour of his friend and said, "Retract that." And there were almost daggers at dawn. This was the first time the sunflowers had been seen by the general public. They didn't understand why he was painting with such thick paint, such bright colours, so unrealistic.
Perhaps it was for the best that Van Gogh didn't make it there himself. A few months later, wanting to be closer to Theo, he checked himself out of the asylum and took a room above a restaurant in Auvers, a small town just outside Paris. But he was never to recover. On July the 27th, 1890, he packed up his easel and his paints and he went out into the countryside. And in the wheat fields outside the town, in circumstances that remain mysterious, he shot himself.
As soon as Theo knew, straight to his brother, and apparently they were chatting. Theo and Vincent smoked a pipe together, and they were talking, and then he gradually became delirious.
As he lay there, he whispered to his brother, "The sadness will last forever."
He died within a day and a half of shooting himself in Theo's arms.
This painting of farms around Auvers is one of the last that Van Gogh made, and, full disclosure, my own favourite. In it, you can just make out 4 solitary sunflowers, an echo, perhaps, of happier times. Had Van Gogh survived, had he been able to cope with his mental illness, who knows what extraordinary, unpainted masterpieces the world would have today? He was only 37 when he died, and artists often live for a long time, so we might have had another 50 years of Van Gogh as a painter. Who knows what he'd have done next? And yet, had Van Gogh not been self-tortured, had he not been mentally ill, he wouldn't have been Van Gogh, and so we wouldn't have what we do have.
I've always thought that one of the great paradoxes of, tragic paradox of Van Gogh's life is that while he was alive, really nobody could stand him. And that changes actually almost from the moment when he shot himself.
His brother Theo arranged the funeral and invited all the artists to come, and they did do. They took the paintings off of the walls and placed them around his coffin, and they also covered his coffin with flowers, mainly sunflowers. He was much admired. I mean, he truly suffered for his art. He agonized for the art world.
Ever afterwards, he's been a figure that people identify with emotionally, perhaps more than any other artist who's ever lived.
But while Vincent had no success during his life, his family were not prepared for that to go on after his death. And there were people alive who understood quite how extraordinary and beautiful these pictures were. A small platoon determined the whole world would know the name Vincent van Gogh. Less than 2 years before he died at the painfully young age of 37, Vincent van Gogh created one of the most famous works of art the world has seen, his iconic 15 sunflowers. I think there's few people who've heard of the name Van Gogh who aren't aware of his short and tragic life. All around the world, he's known as that artist who cut off his own ear, an act almost as famous as his paintings. It's possible that the drama of his life and the manner in which he left it explain some of the popularity and the mystique surrounding Van Gogh's sunflowers today. But that is only part of the story. So what was it that first brought the sunflowers to the attention of the world? It should have fallen to Theo, Van Gogh's art dealer brother, to make sure he was never forgotten. But he died just 6 months after Vincent, and it was left to Theo's widow, Jo, to carry on Van Gogh's legacy.
She could see what he had, and she knew from Theo that Vincent was a very special artist, and she was very clever at managing the legacy of his work.
She was encouraged by fellow artists to actually show Van Gogh's work, and that's exactly what she did, and she made it her life's mission to show what a great artist he was, even though he was a thorn in her side at times.
Slowly, with Jo's help, Van Gogh's paintings began to win attention. In 1910, just 20 years after his death, Sunflowers was included in a huge exhibition in London. 25,000 people queued to see it, and the British fell in love. The National Gallery couldn't let this painting go and eventually paid £1,300 to buy it from Van Gogh's sister-in-law. More people than ever before finally had access to this extraordinary canvas, and Van Gogh's popularity skyrocketed.
On March the 30th, 1987, which would have been Vincent's 134th birthday, one of the sunflowers was sold at auction, the largest sum ever received for a painting, practically $40 million.
The reserve price had been 12 million, and that in itself was seen to be quite ludicrous. It was suddenly an explosion of interest in Van Gogh. And there, from that moment onwards, he became the painter that he'd always known he could be. He has become one of the world's most highly paid artists. What I find frustrating is that in his own time, he was intensely poor and often on the breadline.
Vincent was so poor, he had to choose at one point between smoking his pipe or eating. And then 134 years after his birth, that a painting of his should sell for $40 million. It's just heartbreaking.
Although it wasn't this Sunflowers that went under the hammer, it was the third in the series, the auction sent people flooding back to the National Gallery to see what all the fuss was about. And ever since then, this slightly mysterious pot of flowers, painted by a Dutchman for a Frenchman in France, has been the single most popular thing in Britain's National Gallery.
He never painted when he was having any kind of mania or any illness. He painted when he was happy, and he did have hope. And most of the time, he was very hopeful, and they portray hope. They portray that hope and that happiness.
It's an ecstatic painting, isn't it, really? It's very joyful, and Van Gogh said that he painted it out of gratitude, but also to provide solace to other people who are suffering loneliness and isolation like himself. He's saying, really, find a connection with the natural world around you. Find this wonder, this beauty that is available in a humble flower.
The explanation behind the popularity of Sunflowers is hard to put into words. Ecstatic, joyful, yes. But there's a curious loneliness here as well. Some thrust up. Others wilt and crumple. Some stare back at us, almost like self-portraits. We're instinctively attracted to their beauty, but we are also, all of us, in the end, alone. Van Gogh once said, "I'd like to paint in such a way that everyone who has eyes could understand it." I've used a lot of words in telling this story, but the truth is, we don't really need words. We just need our eyes and our hearts. This is a painting for all people and all time. Next time on the world's greatest paintings, a canvas so famous it's been printed on our banknotes. This is by far the most loved image that Turner ever made. We follow one artist's mission.
He explodes onto the British art scene.
To be remembered long after his death.
It's Turner's gift to you from all of those years ago. He painted it for us.
It's J.M.W. Turner's Fighting Temeraire. These are the stories of 10 of the greatest paintings in the world. I'm Andrew Marr. Art, not politics, is the great passion of my life. For me, it gets to the heart of what it is to be human. In galleries across the globe, there are great paintings, works made with almost supernatural skill, fierce passion, and extraordinary brain power. Now I want to tell stories behind some of the most iconic images in history, pictures like Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Van Gogh's Sunflowers, and Turner's Fighting Temeraire, paintings that represent the pinnacle of what people can do with paint and bristles.
He created a brand new way of depicting the world. The colours would fizz and pop on the surface.
It was like you could touch these people. It was like the portrait could speak to you.
Behind every picture, there is a story. I'm going to peel back the layers to find out more about the lives of their creators and the worlds they came from.
There was something about this middle-class Florentine housewife that intrigued him.
Why are these the paintings we all know and love? How were they created? And what makes them the greatest paintings in the world? Success in the modern world of art is not found in the small details. It's measured by scale of ambition, by price at auction, and your media profile. In short, size matters. This is Tate Modern, the triumphant monster among contemporary art galleries. And with nearly 6 million visitors a year, it's in the top 10 most visited galleries and museums all around the world. So, in a colossal space like this, it's entirely right that we find a hugely important painting by a giant of modern art whose fame is on an equally vast scale. When asked to name the world's most famous painter, more than 90% of us choose him. His paintings are so utterly distinctive that when you see this one whole, there is no question about who painted it. This could only be by one person, Pablo Picasso. It's his Weeping Woman, painted in 1937, and nothing quite like it had ever been made before. Once seen, however briskly, never forgotten. This is one of the most unforgettable of the many remarkable images that Picasso made during an immense career that dominates the art world of the 20th century. For a picture so strong it almost jabs you in the eyes, it's really quite small, and the subject could hardly be simpler. A woman wearing a red hat is crying. She's holding a handkerchief, and she is so grief-stricken, she's more or less chewing it. It's deceptively simple, even cartoon-like. Her face has been shaped using thick black lines and painted using a striking combination of bright acid colours and much darker reds and blues. This is a woman in torment, racked with wrenching anguish. If you look at Picasso's treatment of her face, the tears are like little raindrops or jewels, and her face is marked in grief, almost as if she's been clawed by a tiger, those deep, deep gouges and scratches in blue on the face. You very rarely see visible teeth in portraits, and the teeth are there, again, emphasizing the ugliness almost of grief. Now, this is a very powerful image, but as a Picasso painting, it's not exactly unusual. He was a very prolific artist. It's said that every single day of his working life, Picasso made at least 3 things. And of those things, 10,000 or more were paintings. So what makes this, amongst those 10,000, quite so special? Well, this is an image painted at an important hinge in the artist's life, when a horrific event in Spanish history arrived at a tumultuous moment in Picasso's complicated love life. To really understand this picture properly, we need to go back more than 100 years to the story of the young Picasso, an arrogant, cocky young man determined to take the entire art world by storm. For an arrogant, cocky young man who wanted to make his name, there was only one destination. Even from the earliest years of his life in Spain, where he was born in 1881, the place that drew this prodigious talent like a magnet was Paris.
Anyone that wanted to be a serious artist had to learn about art seriously, and that was happening in Paris. And all the galleries as well, the Louvre, Musée d'Orsay, the beautiful Arc de Triomphe. People flocked to Paris.
And for a young man like Picasso, there were, let's say, other attractions when he finally arrived in 1900, aged all of 19.
There were the bars, the brothels. It was fun, it was inspiring, and it was the place to be.
There was this kind of bohemian mix which was going on in Paris.
It attracts artists, they meet and socialize. But most importantly, they are debating the future of art. They are innovating together, they are taking risks.
I think Picasso was there just exactly at the right time.
The main influences during the early part of his time in Paris were stars of the previous generation, like Renoir and Toulouse-Lautrec. Like them, Picasso painted the world he saw around him in Montmartre, the beggars, bohemians, musicians and dance halls. But to get noticed, he had to show them in radically new ways.
This is where Picasso learns to be an artist. It's a place where he can really flower, where he can really develop, and of course experiment. And the outcome of these experiments are some of the most important and significant developments in modern art in the 20th century.
One of the greatest of his breakthrough works was the almost ugly and still shocking The Ladies of Avignon, or Demoiselles d'Avignon.
The Demoiselles d'Avignon was probably the most important painting of the first half of the 20th century. Picasso paints it in 1907. It's a brothel scene.
It's drawn from his own memories of visiting a brothel in Barcelona when he was a young man living there.
Picasso drew on his latest enthusiasm, African tribal art, and wrenched apart the rules of painting that had dominated Western art for centuries. But even that isn't what really unsettles the viewer. It's the blatant, unashamed animal directness of the brothel girls in their pain. Picasso has turned his back on the beauty and tenderness traditionally associated with nudes.
And you're looking at them sometimes from very multiple angles. So you can see a woman's buttocks and then they're twisted round and you can see her inner thigh. And you get this kind of very intimate but quite brutalized view both of woman but also of humanity.
We're looking at 5 women who do not sit there or stand there passively averting their gaze from the male viewer, but rather they return the gaze with this power, with this extraordinary confidence and sexuality. And this is what made the painting so disarming.
Most who stood in front of it weren't sure where to look. Picasso's great rival Matisse first thought it was a bad joke.
Matisse actually hated Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. He said that Picasso would be found hanged behind the work because it was so bad.
It shocked some of his other friends, and it wasn't shown for a long time because it was regarded as so revolutionary, so kind of brutal, so powerful.
The small coterie of Picasso's friends and admirers seized on this innovation, this moment, and understood and appreciated that art could never be the same again.
Everybody knows that something dramatic has changed and you have to paint your way through it or you have to reject it, but you have to face up to it.
Nowadays, many people argue that that picture was the real beginning of modern painting. But there's an enormous gap between Les Demoiselles d'Avignon and the raw emotional power of Weeping Woman. And to pursue Picasso on that journey, we have to delve deeper into his tangled emotional life and also visit one of the darkest and grimmest episodes in modern Spanish history. Picasso's Weeping Woman nods to everything he's best known for: unique methods, jolting colours, and of course the radical artistic style he personally invented. To understand the genius of this canvas, first, you need to understand Cubism. The great discovery or invention of Cubism, which Picasso and Georges Braque invented together just before the First World War, is that artists can see the world entirely differently. Instead of viewing as a single flat plane in front of them from one perspective, you can bring different perspectives into the same picture. In this 1918 still life by Picasso, he paints a table on which are strewn a guitar, playing cards, a bottle, pieces of table, half-hidden shadows. They're fragmented and jumbled up across the canvas like a broken jigsaw. Breaking reality down in order to build it up again is central to the idea of Cubism. You can, as it were, look around objects and behind them and emphasize their basic shapes. So you've got cylinders and globes and curves and lots of shadows. And by doing that, you see the world differently. Something as boring and banal as a bottle on a table or possibly a guitar suddenly looks interesting again for the very first time. Picasso revolutionized the way people looked at a canvas. It was a skill he would bring to all his most important works, and one which made him fabulously wealthy. By the 1920s, Picasso was an A-list celebrity. He was living his personal dream in a thrilling city, throbbing with excitement and opportunity.
He just became richer and richer. He could do no wrong. The more he painted, the more ideas he had, and he had a lot of ideas, the more his work sold. He became extremely wealthy very quickly.
Picasso was at the peak of his powers, his confidence and productivity overflowing. But while he was driven by everything going on in his creative world, there was one place he looked for inspiration more than most.
Picasso loved women. He loved them around. They made him feel good. As a man who was 5'4" and not particularly handsome, women flocked at his feet. Why? Because the time that they were with him, he made them feel special.
He has many love affairs. He's very charismatic. He's identified early on as a great, enormous talent. He's very seductive, and he has many relationships with women who become his muses, the inspiration, a source of kind of rejuvenation to him.
He referred to women as either goddesses or doormats and weeping machines. And it's extraordinary how they stayed with him, and they fought over one another for his love. And he depicted them time and time again.
Every important work in Picasso's collection, including The Weeping Woman, was inspired by one of his ever-changing cast of lovers. But there were some who meant much more than others. One with whom he had a very long relationship and a daughter was Marie-Thérèse Walter. Her and Picasso's grandson is Olivier.
My grandfather, Pablo Picasso, met my grandmother, my future grandmother, Marie-Thérèse, in 1927, in January, in front of the Galeries Lafayette. She was in the shop. He was looking at her through the window, and he waited outside. And when she came out, he said, "Hello, mademoiselle. I am Picasso, and I would like to make a portrait of you." So she was surprised because she had no clue who Picasso was. But she said that he was a charming man with a beautiful red tie. And this is how the story started. Marie-Thérèse was 17 years old. She was a perfect model for Pablo. She was innocent, and he was like a teacher. And step by step, she became totally addicted to this beautiful little love life.
Marie-Thérèse was the latest in what was a rather long line of women whose character and looks inspired the by now world-famous Picasso to paint and draw furiously. But being his muse wasn't a poetic fate.
Being Picasso's muse was not all it was cracked up to be. You might think, oh, it'd be great, you're living the high life and you're in one of his beautiful villas and being taken out to bars and clubs. But it was a short-lived occupation. You had to be on call, hand and foot, 24/7. There may have been two of you on the go at the same time, and you may not have known about the other one. And it was hard work. You would have to pose for him. You would have to satisfy him. You would have to make sure that he was happy, that he was watered and fed. It was almost like looking after a child.
Away from his studio on the Rue des Grands Augustins, and after nearly 10 contented and prolific years with Marie-Thérèse, Picasso finally began to find that his creative motor was running on empty.
He'd had two very, very difficult years where he'd almost decided to give up painting altogether and become a poet. And, in fact, he joked that on his tombstone he would like to have Pablo Picasso, poet, one-time painter.
But there was new inspiration on the horizon. In 1936, Picasso was at the Café Les Deux Magots, a chic and happening hotspot for Parisian intellectuals and artists, when he was introduced to a woman called Dora Maar, who would eventually be the model for Weeping Woman.
He saw this sophisticated lady seated here. She was playing with a very pointed knife, and she was jabbing with the knife between her spreaded fingers, and sometimes she was missing the target. So there was a lot of blood on her hand, and Pablo was fascinated. She was a photographer, she was an artist, she was a painter, and was far from the situation with Marie-Thérèse, the sweet Marie-Thérèse. The relationship became immediately like intense.
His newest lover, a political artist herself, opened Picasso up to the dark truths about the age they were living through. He began to think afresh and to work afresh.
And he needs something different. And certainly in the 1930s, when he encounters Dora Maar, he really needed somebody who was dark, deep, a woman who was highly intelligent, creative.
Dora Maar was really as much of an artist as Picasso was, but because she was a woman and it wasn't the #MeToo time, she didn't have her chance.
In these two portraits, we can see just how starkly their different characters impacted on his painting. In 1932's The Dreamer, Marie-Thérèse is presented lying back in a post-coital reverie. Curving, overtly sexual forms are rendered in colourful, lush, thick, soft pastel colours. She's a dance of sensual wobble. By contrast, Dora looks back at us in a more challenging way. She blazes with personality. At her ear, drinking from her mind, is a bee, which some suggest may be Picasso himself. This same bee would reappear in Weeping Woman, feeding on a tear. Red fingernails, like that bloodied knife, match the challenging pout of her mouth, and she's all acidic colours and angularity, not cuddly, but incisive. So it's unsurprising that it's Dora who would now change the way that Picasso thought and painted.
Picasso thought that she was extraordinary. She was gutsy, she was fiery, she was not afraid, and he found that very attractive.
It was at the height of his affair with the more mature and challenging Dora, early in 1937, that Picasso was asked to paint something for the Paris International Exhibition, a huge art show opening that summer.
He accepts the commission, and it's going to have to be pretty fast because it has to be finished by June. And the evolution of the painting is quite strange because Picasso has absolutely no idea for the first 2 or 3 months what he's going to do.
Picasso struggles. He got this kind of block.
It was Dora who got him out of his creative hole. In April 1937, she pushed a report about a wartime atrocity under his nose.
It was Dora Maar who brought Pablo's newspaper showing that a village in Spain has been attacked by German planes, dropping bombs everywhere. I've seen the article in the newspaper, so the description was horrible.
First pictures from the Basque Republic of the holy city of Guernica, scene of the most terrible air raid our modern history yet can boast. Hundreds were killed here, men, women, and children. 4,000 bombs were dropped out of a blue sky into a hell that raged unchecked for 5 murderous hours.
Picasso's homeland was being torn apart by a bitter civil war, pitching nationalists against republicans. The nationalists were helped by the Nazi and Italian fascist forces, who had decimated Guernica, largely, it seems, out of mere curiosity to see what a large-scale air raid could do. The attack had no strategic purpose.
They come in, saturation, bombing, sucking the oxygen out, and totally destroying the city.
70% of the city was destroyed and 1/3 of the population was wiped out.
The first time that there has been bombing of that scale in Europe. It's the catastrophe which alerts us to what modern warfare was going to look like.
Reading about Guernica, Picasso was incensed, and he knew he'd found the subject for his Paris exhibition mural.
He said and believed that art is the lie that told the truth, and he wanted the world to know. And Picasso was such a big, majestic superstar now in the art world that he felt that the only way to communicate the truth was through art, because art communicates better than any language, and and it breaks down language barriers.
The work he painted furiously in just a few weeks, the precursor to his Weeping Woman, is called simply Guernica. It now hangs in Madrid's Reina Sofia, where more than 4 million people come to see it every single year. Manuel Borja Virel is the museum's director.
He had many photographs of bombings in Spain. We know that he was looking at the newsreels. We know he was looking at the newspaper. And he's trying to understand this period and using media of the period, but through the tools of a painter. So that's why the painting is black and white, which is the color of the newsreels.
This lack of colour gives added impact to a canvas full of writhing, screaming, dying people and animals, rendered in flattened Cubist caricature.
He reacts with this painting to all these horrors. He reacts also to a new type of violence, the fact that the murder of a complete population could be done in a kind of administrative way.
In 1937, Picasso's mother wrote to him from Barcelona. She described how smoke from the burning city was making her eyes water. And it was this image of a crying woman in a devastated city that then began to play on his mind. In this painting, that distraught woman is a hugely powerful figure. The real-life model for this and the Weeping Woman was Dora. As Picasso worked, Dora was constantly at his side, photographing his progress. She even added the flex on the horse's flank herself.
We see that the tongue, that the scream of the woman could be like an arrow against the bombs, an arrow against the monstrosity, and also the breast. In many cases, they are like bombs, and the top of the breast is like the fuse of the bomb. So what he's telling us is that there is an element of resistance and an element that will be able, through poetry, through the communality of the suffering, overcome the barbarity of the monstrosity of the war.
The bombing of Guernica and his relationship with Dora, a woman in so many ways his equal, changed everything for Picasso. Up to this point, his paintings had centered around Planet Pablo. Now he was making a political statement. It packed a punch, but it did not land him much instant acclaim.
When the painting was first presented in 1937, I mean, of course, there was a group of people that thought it was great, but many people didn't like it. For some avant-garde artists, this was too much of a billboard. This was too much of a propaganda element. On the other hand, many people thought it was too abstract. So in a way, Guernica was caught between the people that thought it was too obvious and the people that thought it was too abstract.
In time, this canvas would find a significant place in the world, but for now, Picasso was restless. Although his great anti-war masterpiece was now finished, Picasso was transfixed by the sufferings of the Spanish, and in particular, that idea of the tears running down the face of his own mother. That became in his head the simplest of images, a weeping, desolate woman. And this was the figure he now needed to immortalize. Pablo Picasso's Weeping Woman is a powerful image of the Spanish Civil War. Having completed and then exhibited his large-scale anti-war canvas, Guernica, he spent weeks obsessively painting and sketching the same tearful woman over and over again, a woman inspired by his mother and modelled on his lover, Dora Maar. This one, his final and widely considered his best, was completed in just a few days. When you get up close and personal with this picture, one of the things you notice very quickly is the thickness of the paint. Now, this is interesting because a lot of the time at this period, Picasso paints quite thinly. He puts great washes of colour, and the paint is really there to serve the drawing, not the other way around. This is different. At times, he's put on so much paint, it's almost on the edge of falling off the canvas. That is interesting because it just shows how hard he was working on this picture. This is a picture he sweated over and worked again and reworked and reworked and reworked until for him it was absolutely perfect. And the sweaty intensity of that physical effort really amplifies his hugely bold choice of colours. What he's done is he's used all the warm, generous colours, the reds and the golds and the yellows and the oranges, but he's pushed them to the back of the picture plane. They're the wall behind the girl, they're the red carpet on which she's standing. Her own face is painted almost entirely in cold, cold colours, lots of white, lots of icy blue, lots of cold, acidic greens. So he's making the desolation vivid through the colours and the choice of colours. It has the raw urgency, not of an academic painting, but of a piece of graffiti in the New York Underground. Brilliant graffiti, I grant you. Picasso is using Cubist distortion, not to show off a new way of seeing or painting, but to show that he, as a modern painter, can represent human desolation and sorrow as emotionally and effectively as any of the great masters of the High Renaissance. This powerful image had a profound effect on an old and close friend of Picasso's. An artist and voracious collector of modern art, Roland Penrose, was visiting Pablo Picasso when he saw it in his studio. He was blown away by the painting's savagery and its power, and even though the paint was barely dry, he asked if he could buy it.
Roland Penrose wanted it. He was desperate to have that painting. And I think it's a recognition, really, of the closeness of their friendship that he allowed Roland to buy it from him.
Picasso sold it to him for £284, £19,000 in today's money. In the back of Penrose's mind were the germs of an idea. He could send it out on a tour with Picasso's first anti-war masterpiece.
He organised both Guernica and Weeping Woman to go around and be shown as a way of highlighting the plight of the people of the Spanish Civil War.
It was really an attempt to alert and raise money by touring this extraordinary work. First of all, it starts in London in the Burlington Galleries, just off Bond Street. And it's not a huge success, but it is supported by people like Virginia Woolf and E.M. Forster, and who give subscriptions to showing it. And it visits other towns. I think it goes to Sheffield. And then it comes back to London, to the Whitechapel.
And 15,000 people come to see the painting. It is opened by Clement Attlee, the leader of the opposition, leader of the Labour Party and subsequent Prime Minister. And it's a great rallying call for the working class in the East End to support the Republican cause in Spain. And apparently the ticket price was a pair of boots to donate to soldiers and workers in Spain who are facing this fascist onslaught.
Picasso's first political works had finally made their mark, 580 miles from the atrocity they portrayed. When the now triumphant tour was over, Penrose took Weeping Woman back to the home he shared with his wife, the photographer Lee Miller, and their son Anthony. He still has very strong memories of the man who painted it, his father's great friend, the now middle-aged Picasso.
When Picasso came here in 1950, he immediately liked it. He felt very at home. He liked the animals on the farm. And he liked things like plum pudding and stuff like that my mother gave him to eat, and Scotch whiskey. He was very keen on that.
At the time, Anthony was just a child.
Well, I was instantly drawn to Picasso because he had this incredible warmth and friendliness and this capacity to really engage with me as a child. We invented a game. I was the bull, and it was my job to put my horns on and charge across the room and try and knock Picasso over. But he was so quick on his feet that he'd jump out of the way at the last minute, and I would go splat into the wall, and I got fed up with going splat into the wall, so I thought of a different strategy. And I watched and waited, and when he wasn't looking, I crept up and I bit him. And he bit me right back. And in the moment before I started to yell, my mum heard him say, "Huh, that's the first Englishman I've ever bitten."
Picasso's Weeping Woman also left its mark on the young Anthony.
I guess I must have been about 8 years old, and I asked my mum, "Why is the lady crying?" And she said, "The lady used to live in a town called Guernica. And one day, without any warning at all, airplanes came over and started dropping bombs. And they killed lots of people and they set fire to the whole place. And they might have even killed her little boy." It gave me an enduring fascination with what was behind that painting. If you look at the woman's eyes, you can see what appear to be the silhouettes of airplanes. Now, she'd probably never, ever seen an airplane in her life before, and suddenly they were there droning through the sky and dropping bombs and killing everybody. That image would have been seared into her retina, if you like, forever. We can see that she is absolutely distraught.
That anger, that pain is what makes Weeping Woman so unforgettable. Now, there are people who think that great art should be like a warm bath, calm and reassuring, a kind of ointment for the pains of daily life. But it seems to me that if art is great, it ought to be able to represent all of human life. And that means the pain and the anger and the sorrow as well. An ointment, a warm bath, this is more like a barbed wire face mask. The Weeping Woman was an extraordinary painting to have on the walls of Penrose's London flat, and it had been part of their lives for more than 30 years when the next page turned in the remarkable story of this painting. Roland and his wife Lee were at home in their Sussex farmhouse in April 1969 when they got a phone call.
It was my father's housekeeper from the apartment in London, and she was distraught. She was sobbing into the phone. The place had been broken into, the whole place had been trashed. The thieves had stolen absolutely the cream of the crop. There were several Picassos. There were, of course, some really important works, but the star of them all was the Weeping Woman. She had gone. My parents were absolutely devastated. They didn't have those paintings in their lives because of the monetary value. They had them there because of their importance as works of art, and to have them taken away, it was like a bereavement. It was a really shattering loss.
Picasso's great and troubling portrait had vanished, if not into thin air, then certainly into the grey London smog. By coincidence, the Metropolitan Police had just established a specialist art theft squad who are now on the case, and a reward worth nearly £500,000 in today's money was offered.
The investigation into the theft went on for quite a long time and not much happened. But then the police found an informer who pretended to be a go-between between Roland and the thieves. And the police were tailing him when the thieves took him to where the paintings were hidden. It was in a shop in South London. Unknown to anybody, that day, a demolition team had moved in to tear down the shop and give it a makeover. So the thieves saw what was going on, and they just went straight on past, and the police were following them, went straight on past, and the whole thing came to nothing.
It seemed as if this great painting about loss might itself be lost forever. Picasso's Weeping Woman is one of the artist's earliest and most powerful pieces of political propaganda. An image of a distraught woman which speaks to us as powerfully today as the year she was painted in response to a wartime atrocity. But in 1969, after more than 30 years as part of a private collection, hanging unseen in a London flat and, frankly, forgotten by the wider world, this extraordinary painting was stolen right off the wall. The Penrose family were terrified that Weeping Woman had disappeared forever. A major police sting operation had failed dismally, and unknown to all but the thieves, the paintings were hidden in a shop which was about to be gutted.
Two of the workmen were tasked with clearing out all the junk, and they went into the basement and they pulled out the works, and one of them said, "Oh, it's all rubbish, burn it." And the other one, he thought, might be a bob's worth in this. And so he took the Weeping Woman to an artist's materials shop. They saw that it was hand-painted in oils and it was signed Picasso, so they thought it might be important. And they called the police. And of course, all hell broke loose in that moment.
Stolen from under their noses and coming perilously close to being dumped in a bin, Weeping Woman was finally back, safe and sound.
My father went to Chelsea police station, where they were all stacked up in a cell for safekeeping. And he said, for the first time in his life, he wept for joy to see them all back and safe.
The responsibility of owning such a painting could not have been made any clearer. And in 1987, Anthony's father gave Weeping Woman to the Tate. And she's been there ever since.
She's meant to be out there, telling people about the atrocity of war.
For the first time in half a century, Picasso's masterpiece was on public display. People flocked to see it and experience for themselves just how remarkable she is.
It's very bold, it's very powerful, and of course, intensely sad. And I think you get almost the feeling of the emotion of her.
The painting, I think, is universally moving, and that's Picasso's brilliance, that's his achievement. He's able to take the particularity of that story of these poor civilians bombed from the air, terrified, injured, suffering, and make this very personal, private painting that speaks of kind of universal pain and grief, that eruption of sorrow that cannot be constrained.
I think it embodied everything that people understood about that whole era and the tragedies that occurred, not just in the Spanish Civil War, but also in World War II.
By the time Picasso died on the 8th of April 1973, he was the most influential artist of the 20th century. His Weeping Woman is a hugely important part of his legacy. But what about the woman who inspired the painting? Picasso's relationship with Dora Maar lasted until the 1940s, when he dumped her for his next muse.
Dora had, I think, a nervous breakdown after the relationship with Picasso finally collapsed.
Picasso felt very guilty. She always said it wasn't because of him, but he felt guilty. He bought her a house, and she more or less lived on her own for the rest of her life.
Weeping Woman is actually the best painting of Dora Maar because it showed her true soul, and I can imagine her weeping like that almost daily towards the end of her relationship and thereafter over Picasso.
Of course, if you get too close to the sun, you get burnt. And that was the tragedy, in a sense, of Dora. And of course, the power of his presence in the art world and the art scene would mean that she would be overshadowed for a huge amount of time.
No longer. Maar is herself today celebrated as a very important artist, and her relationship with Picasso was about much more than its ending. Weeping Woman is testament to that.
Weeping Woman is a tremendously important image because it's a universal image that we can all relate to. It's a picture that talks about suffering And unfortunately, at one time or other, we are all used to suffering.
I've known this painting for a long time, but I'd never realized before just how political it is. And I'm not just talking about the Spanish Civil War, I'm talking about relations between men and women. They say the personal is political, and that was certainly the case for Pablo Picasso. The Weeping Woman is as powerful today as she has ever been. There are plenty of paintings, perfectly well made, which somehow become limp and lifeless over time. And there are other paintings which radiate energy and become more alive and draw us in as time goes on. This picture crackles and fizzes with energy. It is impossible to be in the presence of the Weeping Woman and ignore her. And if you're looking for a definition of a great painting, that is about as clear as you can get. Next time, the final masterpiece of a truly iconic artist. People come into these rooms for that sense of serenity, and they walk out feeling calm and reassured about the world. This is the story of personal tragedy.
He became so depressed that he stopped painting.
Brutal violence.
He could hear the fighting, he could hear the bombs. So many young soldiers were killed.
And insatiable obsession behind Claude Monet's Water Lilies. These are the stories of 10 of the greatest paintings in the world. I'm Andrew Marr. Art, not politics, is the great passion of my life. For me, it gets to the heart of what it is to be human. In galleries across the globe, there are great paintings, works made with almost supernatural skill, fierce passion, and extraordinary brainpower. Now I want to tell stories behind some of the most iconic images in history, pictures like Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Van Gogh's Sunflowers, and Turner's Fighting Temeraire, paintings that represent the pinnacle of what people can do with paint and bristles.
He created a brand new way of depicting the world. The colours would fizz and pop on the surface.
It was like you could touch these people. It was like the portrait could speak to you.
Behind every picture, there is a story. I'm going to peel back the layers to find out more about the lives of their creators and the worlds they came from.
There was something about this middle-class Florentine housewife that intrigued him.
Why are these the paintings we all know and love? How were they created? And what makes them the greatest paintings in the world? What makes a painting a masterpiece? That is, of course, a subjective judgment, but there are some paintings so important, so iconic, that they come to represent an age or a culture or a nation. And it's these kind of pictures which very often form the centerpiece of the great museums and the galleries of the world. All around the globe, there are images which speak to a nation in ways that no others can match. And here in Amsterdam, there is a canvas loved by the Dutch like no other. This colossal gallery at the heart of the vast and beautiful Rijksmuseum doesn't just contain the most important painting in Dutch history, it was actually built around it. in what feels like a huge secular chapel dedicated to Dutch art, there hangs Rembrandt's world-famous and utterly stupendous Night Watch. This was an act of risk-taking, almost of arrogance, created by the greatest Dutch artist at the very height of his powers. Now, it's nothing short of a national treasure. So what is it? It's a group portrait of a militia company, what you might call a platoon of Amsterdam's People's Army. There are 16 men visible in all. We know most of their names. Right at the centre, with that magnificent white ruff, is Frans Banning-Kock, the commander of the militia, giving the order to advance. And beside him in the canary yellow is Willem van Ruttenberg, his lieutenant. All around the picture, there are different things going on. There's a dog barking, there's a young girl staring into the distance, there's a man cleaning his musket. Somebody else, right in the centre, has fired his musket by mistake and nearly hit somebody else's hat. Rembrandt's characters feel so alive, they could almost jump off the canvas. But if they did, they wouldn't get very far. Now, if you've been watching really carefully, you may have noticed there is a strange big glass box around it. Now, why is that? And the answer is, it is being restored, properly for the first time in more than 40 years. For your average masterpiece, any major restoration would be carried out as far away from the prying eyes of the public as possible. But the Night Watch isn't average, it's not allowed to skulk or to take time out. People care about this picture so much that they're prepared to watch it being restored. If they're not prepared literally to watch paint dry, then they're prepared to watch varnish dry, which you must admit is kind of unusual. So what is it about this collection of rather chaotic, strutting, striding, would-be unprofessional soldiers from another age in their impressive collection of strange hats and weird party clothes that gets so many people so emotional, so committed? It's a mystery that spans more than 300 years, takes in an artist's triumphant rise and tragic fall, and almost sees the Night Watch forgotten forever. This painting's story begins in a period of unrivaled creativity in Dutch art, made by new money and cutthroat competition.
The Netherlands in the 17th century was a very, very particular environment because it had this growing, flourishing art market.
You could buy a painting just for your weekly wage. And paintings were sold at markets, you know, alongside kitchenware, chickens. So these weren't just objects for the extremely wealthy, but anyone could own works of art.
This was a world of unequaled artistic production. Make it new, make it fast, make it different, with groundbreaking changes in technique, perspective and subject. Born in July 1606, Rembrandt had arrived into the Dutch Golden Age.
Rembrandt was born in the Dutch town of Leiden, which is about half an hour away from Amsterdam. And he was born in a pretty kind of bourgeois family.
His father was a miller, big family, lots of children. They managed to afford to send him to the local Latin school, so he learnt languages, he learnt about religion.
But there was really only one thing that interested the young Rembrandt. His itch, his instinct, his determination was to be an artist. And at 14, he began his apprenticeship.
He entered the workshop of a local artist, and that's where he learned, as it were, the craft.
He would have learned how to draw, how to use colour, how to mix and make his own paints. It doesn't appear that he just wakes up and is suddenly a brilliant artist, but rather, in his early works, with our own eyes, we can see him progressing.
Rembrandt's first canvases are full of mistakes, but each and every one ripples with ambition. They show daring colours, bold textures, and above all, an unusual approach to lighting. He was a young artist who wanted urgently to be different, to produce a style that was his alone. This was the formative period for the young Rembrandt, and much of the thinking and the skill you can see in the Night Watch goes back to the Leyden years, when he was working on the consistency of his paint and finding new ways to portray light in a more dynamic fashion.
His early masterpiece from that period, Judas Returning the 30 Pieces of Silver, is spectacular because it is all about creating the drama of the scene and emphasizing the drama through very dramatic lighting. Also, when you look at his very early self-portraits, there is one where almost his entire face is in shadow.
It was this painting, created when Rembrandt was in his early 20s, that put him on the map. No one had painted themselves in quite the same way before. This was one of the first of more than 80 self-portraits Rembrandt would create across his lifetime. And it brought the young painter to the attention of some of the most influential art brokers in the area. But soon, even his hometown wasn't big enough to contain Rembrandt's ambition. What this single-minded artist had wanted from birth was to stand out, and for that, he'd have to try himself on a far bigger stage.
There's so much opportunity in Amsterdam. Those most prestigious commissions, those were to be found in the big city.
If you really wanted to get big-time clients, then you had to go to Amsterdam. That's where the riches really were.
Rembrandt moved to a studio in Amsterdam in 1631. To put it simply, this aspiring young painter was following the money. During the Golden Age, Amsterdam was already overflowing with talented artists competing for fame and fortune. Joining them, Rembrandt was making a supremely bold move that would put him step by steady step on the road to the Night Watch. The Night Watch is one of the most famous paintings in the world, the jewel in the crown of Amsterdam's Rijksmuseum. And it's easy to see why. This is a canvas bursting with life, brimming with stories and hints of intrigue, one of which is the identity of a half-hidden face only just emerging from the shadows. Now, of the 34 different people in the picture, there is one who technically shouldn't be there at all. He's absolutely dead center, right up towards the top. A very, very distinctive snub nose, a little round, inquiring, slightly cheeky eye. It is, of course, Rembrandt himself. Like Alfred Hitchcock, he's put himself into the film, as it were. The Night Watch shows a glimpse of an artist at the exhilarating peak of his power and ambition. Just over 10 years earlier, he'd arrived in Amsterdam, desperate to make his fortune.
Amsterdam would have been very exciting in the 17th century. It's loud, it's busy, it was a real metropolis. And for artists, that represented a huge opportunity.
War with the Spanish Empire was over, Dutch ships crisscrossed the world, and now the city was packed with wealthy merchants eager to spend their fortunes on portraits for their brand new townhouses. Fresh in from Leyden, which itself had been besieged by the Spanish, here was a painter who could offer something new.
Rembrandt kind of burst onto the scene and quite quickly got quite important commissions.
He was one of the first artists to capture physical expressions across a face. He painted portraits as though he could penetrate the person and get their personality.
He uses highlights so cleverly that you see that wet bit at the bottom of the eyelid, and the wrinkles around the eyes and so forth are so acutely observed.
These are very impactful pieces. He breathes life into his sitters, and other artists are just not at that same level at that time.
From his very first commission, it was clear that Rembrandt's work was different to everything else around him. He painted faces bathed in light and shadow, used the wrong end of his brush to scratch individual hairs into the paint, and became a master of touchably real surfaces. But most important, with a skill that would become vital to the success of the Night Watch, he depicted his sitters with a fresh immediacy. There is a kind of ruddy, earthy realism about the faces. These are actual, living, breathing, sweating people that you could have met in the streets of Amsterdam, and there is no mistaking that at all. Suddenly, this provincial miller's boy was the most popular portraitist in the city. And yet, always hungry for the next advance, Rembrandt needed more. Private commissions were fine, but he really wanted to create work on a bigger scale. He wanted to be properly noticed.
I think his first major success was the anatomy lesson of Nicholas Tulp. That was painted in 1632, and that was a very public commission. It was a way of marketing himself. And I think people would have seen that and thought, yes, that's the man who I want to paint my portrait too.
Rembrandt's first multi-portrait painting was a taste of the night watch to come, and it reveals his swelling ego. For the first time, he simply signed himself Rembrandt, audaciously assuming the same one-name celebrity label as Leonardo, Michelangelo, or Raphael. He saw himself as the rising hero of the Amsterdam art scene. What Rembrandt wanted now was a lifestyle to match. In 1634, he married the love of his life, Saskia van Uylenburg, and the glamorous young couple threw themselves into enjoying Rembrandt's good fortune.
They enjoyed life. They went out, they spent, they lived a very lavish lifestyle.
Rembrandt was very confident. He was spending lots of money. He was quite flash. He was very pleased that he was earning this money and saw that this was not going to end, so he could just spend it as it came.
He was living the high life.
Fancy clothes, luxurious meals. Rembrandt, it seemed, could shell out for anything his heart desired, including this princely three-story townhouse in the most sought-after area of the city. Now a popular Amsterdam museum, Dr. Lidewij de Koek is its director.
Rembrandt bought this house in 1639, and by that time he was the most famous artist in Amsterdam, and he was very wealthy. It cost 13,000 guilders, which was a fortune in that time, and this was the most opulent and large house in the whole street.
Rembrandt's spending, however, didn't stop here. Every time he finished painting, he'd pick up his wallet and head out shopping, filling his new house with curious purchases.
This room is Rembrandt's art cabinet, Kunstkabinet in Dutch. And this is where he shows his ambition, he shows his extreme drive and his fascination for beautiful objects.
He was something of a spenderholic, and his tastes were quite eclectic, so he buys things like armor,
Venetian glass, seashells,
stuffed animals and bits of coral.
We don't know how much he spent. It must have been a fortune.
And in his new mansion, there was one room that was more important than any other.
Now, this was, of course, the largest room in the house. This is the grand studio. The light is fantastic. It's northern light, and it would have reflected beautifully into the studio. And of course, light, dark and light, chiaroscuro, very important in Rembrandt's work.
The high creativity of the master painter needed to be matched with the basic haggling business of funding his lifestyle. To sell himself and win the big commissions, Rembrandt needed to look the part.
This is the grand entrance hall. We call it the voorhuis, the front house. It would have been the grand entrance next to the street. And these were sort of the public areas where visitors were allowed in and where Rembrandt showed the opulence of his household, but also his success as a painter. And it would have been really set to impress. It would have helped close deals on paintings.
It's most likely to have been here that in 1640, after almost a decade working in Amsterdam, Rembrandt was approached for his biggest commission yet, the Night Watch.
So the Night Watch was commissioned by the Kloveniersdolen, which was the headquarter of the civic militia, and they commissioned it for their Great Hall.
The civic militia were close-knit groups of citizen soldiers, a kind of dad's army standing by to protect their communities from Spanish attack. And the way their portraits were captured was a tradition unique to the 17th century. For years, they'd been painted by the most established artists of the day in a similar style, the men dressed up in their finest clothes, arranged in a simple line like a school photo or a bizarre bus queue. But in 1640, when the group from District 2 decided to commission their portrait, rather than go with a reliable regular, they turned to Amsterdam's edgy celebrity, even though Rembrandt had never tackled anything like this before. Carla Ohers is an expert in art history.
They were vain men. They wanted the portraits to be done by a famous portrait painter. Rembrandt in those days was really like a superstar. So they were commissioning their group portrait with him because they wanted to have their portrait done by a famous artist.
The company leader, brash enough to put his portrait into the hands of the radical young Rembrandt, was pink-faced, red-haired Captain Frans Banijay.
It's a name I think every Dutch person knows because he is the main character in the Night Watch, the head of the civic militia group. He was in charge.
As tradition decreed, Banijay would have wanted his expensive commission to capture his men as war heroes, even if the reality was somewhat different.
Originally, they were defending the city in times of war. So in that period, the war against Spain. But when Rembrandt was doing the Night Watch, the Spanish troops were gone. My opinion, they were not real soldiers anymore.
There was a sense of nostalgia. The Dutch people were very respectful towards them and grateful towards them for what they had done in the past. But what was there left for them to do?
They were, in general, rich, important people. We know about them as Old Boys Network, a sort of Rotary Club or Lions Club. They were quite well known because of their, well, gatherings in which they were drinking and eating and maybe gambling and giving each other good positions within the society.
They may have done more networking and drinking than fighting, but the importance of the militia was still deeply ingrained in their communities and their minds. This was a young country which had just freed itself from the Spanish Empire by fighting. But Rembrandt couldn't bring himself to copy what had come before him, even if radical reinvention would add extra difficulty to an already tricky brief.
You have to paint anywhere between 10 and 20 guys, but that makes for a really boring composition if you have to line them up. So the challenge for the artist really was to turn this into an interesting composition where you have the impression that they maybe interact with each other, that they talk to each other, but they also all have to look at the viewer in order to be recognized. So it seems like an almost impossible task.
This was why most artists responded with a traditional, simple arrangement. Even then, there were added complications.
They paid for their individual portraits, so the more money you were paying, the best position you could get.
The cheapest option would be at the sides of the painting, in profile, maybe just your head or a bit of your eye. And the most expensive would be your whole figure, doing something majestic, doing something very dramatic.
With the Night Watch, Rembrandt was juggling 18 different figures and egos, and the position of his subjects wasn't his only challenge, because this work was not intended to stand alone. 6 other Dutch artists had also been commissioned to make major group portraits for the same room, and by the time Rembrandt started painting, 4 had already been finished. They had all played by the rules. This was entirely competent bus-queue painting, and therefore, for the ever-ambitious Rembrandt, more than a little boring. And so the artist who'd based his entire career on being different decided to create an entirely new type of militia portrait. When it was finally unveiled, the Night Watch would indeed be a painting completely unlike any of its predecessors. In 1640, Rembrandt began work on a painting that would come to define him, The Night Watch. This was the only civic militia portrait he would ever produce, but true to form, Rembrandt scrapped convention, instead taking the biggest risk of his career.
What Rembrandt did, which was very different, was to place his figures as if they're in an actual battle. It actually looks like they're about to go to war, and he constructs a narrative around them. He presents what is a portrait more like a history painting. That had never been done before and was completely game-changing.
This was amazing. This was like watching a movie, and because the figures are life-size, you really feel as though you've got to get out the way because they're going to come towards you and you're in danger. You're in the way.
He has created a very unusual and risky composition, throwing aside all the usual rules about lining people up so that he can achieve the illusion of this militia company literally marching out of the wall, off the canvas and towards the viewer. And to do that, he has made some very strange decisions about the lighting. Most other artists lit their civic guard portraits pretty simply, a bright overhead glare. But now Rembrandt tried something very different. Shadows shroud much of the canvas, and instead he picked out his main characters almost as if with spotlights. If you look just here, for example, you can see the light illuminating Koch's outstretched hand, casting a shadow which cuts across the Amsterdam coat of arms embroidered on his lieutenant's jacket. It's a bit like a theatre director or a film director's lighting, and that gives the picture a dynamism that Rembrandt can't have been sure when he started it would actually achieve. The whole painting is a performance, and Rembrandt has even provided his own soundtrack. A musket goes off behind the captain. There's the rat-a-tat-tat of a drum. A dog seems to bark. It's a cacophony of noise, action, and movement. And here is the final, almost ludicrous risk that Rembrandt is taking with this picture. This is a militia. These are would-be soldiers. They are men who want to be remembered as soldiers, dangerous men, except that this must be the least dangerous, least lethal, least threatening group of so-called would-be soldiers in the history of art. They are ridiculous. One's firing his gun by mistake, all their weapons are pointing in different directions, and their mascot girl is laughing at them. Rembrandt is telling a story, but it's not the story that militia expect. It is an entirely different story. And it was one he had to tell carefully in order to tread a fine line between honour and insult. This was a far from straightforward painting to complete, and for nearly 2 years, Rembrandt worked on the canvas relentlessly. In July 1642, the Night Watch was finally finished, and with great expectation installed in the militia group's Guild Hall. I think it's fair to say they were in for a surprise.
It wasn't what they expected at all. You know, they didn't know how to react to this drama. Are they meant to laugh at it? Are they meant to be aghast at it? Are they meant to be in awe of the fact that every one of those people is captured through the expression and the personality and the stance?
I think some of the sitters in the picture were quite unhappy about how they were shown because they did not get the prominence that they had expected.
But it must have been admired because it was immediately put on the wall. Rembrandt was paid for it in full, and the head of the Civic Guard had several copies made for himself to have in his own home and to give to friends.
The Night Watch may have been unveiled to a mixed reception, but no one could deny that this was daring, unique, bold. Rembrandt had taken a huge gamble, and he'd created something extraordinary. Everyone could see that. But now, just as Rembrandt triumphed artistically, disaster befell him at home as his beloved Saskia died.
Rembrandt really loved his wife Saskia. That was a period of great melancholy for Rembrandt. He was devastated when she died.
Commercial success seemed to mean so much less without Saskia to share it. A year before, she'd given birth to the couple's only surviving child, a boy they'd named Titus. And now Rembrandt faced raising his son alone. But his time of disaster wasn't over.
After the Night Watch, which really represents the peak of his career, Rembrandt's career goes into something of a decline. In the decade that follows, his commissions significantly decrease.
Public taste changed. People wanted a little less brown, something more fashionable, something more frivolous, what they considered to be lighter, brighter paintings.
And I think Rembrandt couldn't or didn't want to keep up.
For the first time in his working life, Rembrandt was out of fashion, out of commissions, and therefore, pretty soon, out of money.
Rembrandt continued to spend extravagantly even after his fortunes were in decline. And eventually, in 1652, his creditors said, "That's enough, we're calling in our debts." And Rembrandt couldn't cope. Eventually, he had to sell his house and possessions at auction and was forced into bankruptcy.
Rembrandt had to move from the big house he'd bought with Saskia in Amsterdam to a very rough part of town where he lived for the last 13 years of his life.
The man who'd once been Amsterdam's richest painter now cowered in the city's shadiest suburb. It had only been a handful of years since he'd produced his masterpiece, but his life was now unrecognizable.
It was a real fall from grace. In order to recover some of his debts, he's even forced to sell Saskia's tomb in 1664.
That must have caused him great melancholy and trauma. She was the love of his life.
Rembrandt's livelihood was hanging by a thread, and yet, wrinkle by wrinkle, failure by failure, he magicked disaster into triumph. The realism he'd brought to Banningcock's men now applied to his own aging features, creating what are now seen as his most moving work. Even now, worse was still to come. In 1668, Titus, his son, was killed by a plague. There was simply nothing left for Rembrandt. He struggled on for one more year before dying penniless and alone at the age of 63. He was so forgotten by the town that had once loved him, there wasn't even an official notice of his death.
In spite of the fame Rembrandt achieved in his lifetime, he was buried in a pauper's grave. So it's an unmarked grave, and it doesn't exist today. You can't find it.
All that remains of his final resting place is a plaque, erected in 1909 in the Westerkerk Church, acknowledging his forlorn death. It's frankly very moving to be here, to reflect on Rembrandt's own life, all the hard work, the years and years of toil, the terrible disappointments, the struggles, the disasters, the bankruptcies, and towards the end of his life, that sense of a great dark cloud hanging over everything. What would he have thought had he been able to be here now and realise that his greatest and most complicated work is at the heart of Amsterdam, at the heart of the greatest Dutch museum, and in many ways at the heart of the Dutch people? But before the Night Watch could embark on its triumphant progress to Dutch national icon, it would, a little like its creator, suffer its own humiliation. 73 years after it was first hung in the militia HQ, the colossal canvas was moved to Amsterdam's palatial town hall, now a palace. Alice Tachken is its curator of exhibitions.
So this is the room where the Night Watch was hung in 1715, when it was taken from the Klovenierstoelen to here. This was the office of the colonels of the Great War Council.
But in bringing the night watch to its new home, the officials faced a rather tricky problem.
The night watch was placed in between those two doors behind me. The problem was, though, that the space between the doors was too small. So they took the pragmatic route and cut it down on all sides.
In what must be one of the most brutal truncations in art history, Rembrandt's glorious night watch was chopped down to fit its new home.
We know what was lost on the night watch because of a small-scale copy made by Gerrit Lundens. The portions that were taken off were actually essential to understand the painting. So what we see on the copy is that the guard company is passing through a city gate and over a bridge over a canal. So that makes it very logical that all the people are moving.
So they cut off about 2 feet from the left, which took off a couple of people, and it cut off an area at the top, which meant that all the wonderful perspective and the archway and the rods and the banners, that was all not as intended.
We have no idea what happened to the pieces that they cut off. They cut those pieces off because they thought they weren't that important. So in all probability, they just threw them out. We have no idea. Maybe they'll turn up sometime.
By the end of the 18th century, Rembrandt was long dead and forgotten. His remains lost in a pauper's grave, his most important work butchered to fit its space in a gloomy council chamber. It seemed this masterpiece must surely be consigned to history, and yet there's an extraordinary twist to the story still to come. By the turn of the 19th century, Rembrandt's Night Watch, the work he'd been most proud of, the one he'd produced right at the peak of his extraordinary career, was hanging in an out-of-the-way council chamber, a fraction of its original size. But this all-but-forgotten masterpiece had not reached the end of the road just yet.
Now, among many other things, Rembrandt was a storyteller, and I think he would have been delighted that his greatest painting, his most complicated painting, is not only valued around the world for its own qualities, but also for the extraordinary and, frankly, bizarre story behind it.
And the next chapter of this canvas's tale begins 300 miles from Amsterdam in the world's artistic capital at the time, Paris. By the later 19th century, a new artistic movement was gripping the French, the Impressionists, a radical group of then young avant-garde artists painting real life as they saw it. They much preferred Rembrandt's work to the cold academic traditions of their own city. They loved the rich warmth of his shadows, the immediacy and the realism of his sitters. This new wave of painters felt a kinship with the old Dutch master.
There's a real reappreciation of Rembrandt, and I think people like the romantic, wild side of Rembrandt, you know, especially those late works where he's really painting with very thick paint. What was once out of fashion becomes more loved.
Certainly his humanity in the pictures, his talent for getting through the surface to something deeper in the sitter, and his compositions, the lighting and so forth, has certainly impressed and influenced many artists.
Van Gogh called him a magician, writing, "Rembrandt says things for which there are no words in any language." And as his status and influence soared around the world, the Dutch too began to notice. The prodigal son was, at long last, welcomed home.
He was rediscovered, if you like, and then became a national icon as the archetype of Dutchness. He became the national hero.
And as Rembrandt came back in vogue, so too did his most patriotic painting, a reminder of the days when the Dutch had fought an empire to found their citizens' republic. In 1885, Amsterdam's brand new Rijksmuseum prepared to open to the public. The Night Watch was top of the curator's priority list. And they had a much more radical solution than their 18th century counterparts about how to fit this enormous canvas to the wall. they decided to build it a whole new wing of its own.
This gallery was specifically built for the Night Watch. You know, this kind of what resembles a church interior. It's a gallery of honor, and you walk in a ceremonial way up to the high point, which in any normal church be the altar. At the end of the enfilade is then the great masterpiece, which is the Night Watch.
Rembrandt's masterpiece was no longer just being displayed, it was being worshipped. Resting in the very heart of the new National Gallery, this painting was now a national treasure.
Rembrandt painted the Night Watch to raise pride in anyone who looks at it, civic pride, to be proud of your town, proud of your country. And centuries later, it still does that. It does exactly that for Amsterdam and for the rest of the Netherlands.
That painting's so loved by the Dutch because it's part of their history and it shows, you know, we're heroes and we're here to protect and we're dashing and we're frivolous and we're action-packed, we're superheroes.
Night Watch mania has gripped the Dutch nation ever since. Nowadays, Rembrandt's canvas is visited by more than 2 million people every single year. It's so loved that when the Rijksmuseum reopened after major refurbishment works in 2013, the painting was welcomed back on display with enormous fanfare.
People go wild. The painting's paraded through the streets of Amsterdam. There's tremendous celebration.
The Night Watch is transported in this huge wooden crate, and there's children there waving flags and people are throwing flowers. And it's almost like the World Cup final footballers have arrived home.
And the extraordinary tributes to this beloved canvas haven't stopped there. To mark the museum's reopening, this group of actors in southern Holland brought the Night Watch to a shopping centre in a way that would surely have made Rembrandt chuckle. It's a love affair that shows no sign of abating.
It tells a story in a way that no other painting has ever done. It tells a fragment of history with action.
It's crazy that a painting in the 21st century is treated with such adoration, but this is such an iconic painting, and Rembrandt is such a symbol of Holland and Amsterdam that it holds a place like no other work can.
A national icon, absolutely. But for me, it's so much more. The Night Watch is a painting about perfectly ordinary people standing up to tyranny. And that's a theme that can speak for everyone.
This is a picture which comes out of the Dutch experience, but it's not for the Dutch, it's for everybody. Because what does it show? It shows a group of very human humans, strutting, ridiculous, absurd. They are silly, as I am silly, as you are silly. But they're coming together for a common purpose. They're all doing their own thing in this picture, but it shows the moment just before they do one single thing, marching out into the light together. This shows what happens when a free people come together for the common good. It is therefore the greatest Republican painting ever made, a great painting of democracy and ultimately of tolerance. It shows what happens at that very moment when we stop doing our own little self-absorbed, selfish things and come together to do one big thing all together. And at that moment, the encroaching dark, which seems so scary, which surrounds them and surrounds every one of us, suddenly doesn't seem quite so frightening after all.
Next time, Tate Britain's most popular and most haunting canvas.
This is not a pretty story. It's a young woman's suicide by drowning. A painting in which life mirrored art.
The fact that Lizzie Siddal did suffer whilst posing did inject that extra sense of realism.
And that even inspired a grave robbing.
He claimed that her hair had grown so much it filled the whole coffin.
The remarkable story of Millet's Ophelia.